the reason it's not going to happen, that you're going to have a sane bilateral agreement for a neutral Ukraine, is that the folks who are pushing the expansion of the neoliberal West are on a religious crusade.
This is not a business where you take polls. It's a business where you think. You're not right or wrong because 1,000 people agree with you.
All right, we're rolling. Ron, thanks for coming on.
Thanks for having me.
Of course. Yeah, we've been, since the first time with Josh and I started planning the podcast, you were very early on the guest list of somebody we need to have on. So,
well, I'm honored that you'd think that. So,
yeah. Well, there's a lot to cover. You are one of the most interesting men in the world. That's what Twitter says, at least. But speaking of Twitter, your bio, I think it's a good place to start. You touch on three things: hedge fund, geopolitics, Christian theology. So why don't you tell us a little bit about your background as you touch on those three things, and then we go from there.
I've been in the hedge fund industry. It's really all I've done since graduate school. I was accounting finance double major at SMU here in Dallas, and spent a little bit of time in real estate accounting and audit, because the family business owned a bunch of apartment complexes, and I went all over the country auditing apartments. But really, I had a friend in the hedge fund business, a lot of math, but a lot of finding inefficiencies that were cool using math, using visual pattern recognition. And it really interested me. And so I went back to grad school really with the goal to be in a quant shop, even though it wasn't really called back. We weren't called hedge funds back then. They were just private investment vehicles. I've been in statistical vol arb, which is a fancy way of saying using derivatives to kind of scrape the difference between implied and realized volatility. But it's more exciting than it sounds. It really is. And I love it. The math is more intuitive than it is applied. I'm not spending all day, on a whiteboard, with my hair everywhere, doing crazy stuff. It's really trying to take away the natural imbalance between buyers and sellers in volatility, which is kind of an actualized risk kind of thing. And I've been doing it for a long time and have never had a down year. Knock on something.
Great.
And and I really love it. I love it because it allows me also to spend a lot of time just learning about things, because anything could be an exogenous risk to the market, which is one of the things we look at. So yeah, that's probably a huge part of why I like it so much. I'm able to study and learn things.
And is that how that connects to geopolitics for you? As both an interest that you have, but also related to your core vocation work? That's
right. Well, the geopolitics was more, I always was studying it, but it took me really getting to know tangentially George Friedman when he was running Stratfor Global Intelligence in Austin, and I became a subscriber of his, and then understanding there was a systematic view of geopolitics rather than just trying to tie a bunch of loose threads together. There was a corpus of thought about why geography and people groups have these long-term impacts on how they relate to one another. And I thought it really relates to kind of a systematic view of theology, which is another thing that's hugely important to me. And I think they tie together actually a little bit, and they reward deep study, not just financially, but as seeing us as humans as who we are, how I think we should glorify God, and how we end up really manifesting that in different ways around the world. So just the three things that you mentioned in my Twitter bio that I should have put more thought in, I guess. they do tie together. It's how do you study and look at the world and learn about it, and how does that impact who we are? How do we reflect who made us and made the world?
Yeah, I think you just touched on why we wanted to have you on. The way that you, in conversations we've had, you look at the world is very much, it seems to me at least, through models. And you have models as you analyze your 4 monitors that you have, and then
I think that's fair.
Yes, there you go. And then you have models about geopolitics, and then you use the language of Scripture, which you're an expert in.
Well, I don't know about that, but I think that it's good to have models as coat hangers to put your clothes on, but you always have to be flexible. And just as so often, you get maybe a different sport coat or a different pair of pants or different pair of shoes. You've got to be flexible and realize that as you mature, your models should mature as well and be more complete. And that requires humility, which sometimes in folks who are good at doing models is difficult.
Did you grow up thinking this way?
I grew up in a broken home here in a suburb here in Dallas. My dad left. He was a brilliant, a brilliant man in math. He was the youngest partner in Pete Mark, which is now KPMG history. He used to do this party trick. I would be a young kid at one of his singles parties in the 70s, and he would ask everybody their social security number, and he'd recite them back to them backwards. Just a freak. But what had a huge impact on me were my 2 grandfathers. One grandfather was just deeply godly man. I watched him go to bed and study his Bible for an hour or 2 every night. And then my other grandfather was a man who just loved reading. And he gave me for a birthday a set of Funkin' Wagnalls. It was 1972, leather-bound Funkin' Wagnalls encyclopedia. And I spent so much time just reading through that. I found it so interesting that you could learn about the world just by picking a book up off the shelf. And that's times a million now with what we have at our fingertips. That can be both good and dangerous, but I find it fascinating. The world and the people who God has placed in it, be they friend or enemy, they're all interesting. Everyone has a story just deep within them that's profoundly interesting, that somehow reflects God and their life work as well. So I love, I have a passion for reading about that.
It seems like part of the ability to think or approach the world this way means that you assume, and I know you more than assume, but in the model, assume that there is order in the world that can be extracted and analyzed. Right? It's not a chaotic world. It's a world that you can study, you can recognize patterns, you can decipher. Is that accurate?
It's a complicated question. I think there is order in the world. I think it's imposed upon the world, and that order. One of the mathematician/scientists that I find very interesting, and I'm an admirer more than a true student, but is Mandelbrot. And we see that I think the order that is in the world is more Paisley than perfect cubes. In other words, we tend to want order that is very easily apprehended and comprehended. And sometimes the order that is in the world is hidden. God, conceals a matter. It's to his glory, but it's the glory of kings to search a matter out. And so I do believe there's order imposed upon the world by God. I think we sometimes as humans do our best to be agents of chaos, but we are rewarded for searching that order out and seeing, the hidden things.
What are some key people or books that make up part of your mental models or frameworks?
A book that had a huge impact on me, and I wasn't prepared for that question, but that you're, it's may give some folks pause. Michael Porter, Competitive Advantage.
What's it about?
It's about business and how you approach a market, and how there's these 5 factors that you get that impact that. But this system at where I was in, it's easy when you're young to just think, well, if I just work harder and have a good product, everything is going to fall in line. And Porter really had a systematic way of showing, well, it's more complicated than that. There's channels, there's barriers to entry, so on and so forth. And it just seeing even business in a systematic way, again, a modeled way, had a big impact on me. Another book that had a big impact on me at the was Putting Amazing Back into Grace by Michael Horton, where this is about almost the exact same time that I read Competitive Advantage. I read Horton's book, that God, in order to understand the Bible as it is written and how we receive it, that if you believe it, that God is truly gracious beyond our imagination, that it's a sovereign grace, that again, as agents of chaos, we seem to be doing our best to disturb God's order, to disturb his revealed plan, and yet he still chooses to come and deal with us graciously. Hugely impactful. And then the work of, I'm a happy member of the PCA, Presbyterian Church in America, but a dispensational guy, local pastor named Tommy Nelson, had a ministry where, he's a Bible church guy, but he preached like an Elizabethan Calvinist, where he would just let the Bible speak for himself. Let's talk about I'm going to recite the next 10 verses and then I'm going to explain them. Again, profoundly impactful, particularly when he spoke on typology. And the reason is, again, we speak of order impressed upon the world by God. Well, typology comes from the Greek word tupos, which means to imprint upon. Very impactful, very impactful. But I could go on and on about books and godly men and women who've impacted me.
You told me the other day, speaking of Greek, you told me the other day that you taught yourself Greek at some point.
Yeah, I mean, a limited, Koine, which is the form of Greek that the New Testament is written in, the Greek completion to our Bible, is a very simple. It doesn't take. It's not like going and learning Russian or Chinese, Mandarin. It is about 900 words, and you've got the gist of it. If you spend time just reading it with a good interlinear, and then have a vocabulary program, the endings, the cases, and so forth, tend to manifest themselves pretty quickly. So I can't go and speak. I mean, a very, very tiny amount. Speak it, but I can read it and understand what's going on. But the key is learning Greek did for me is understanding the politics of translation and of tradition. And without getting too far in the weeds, even our word for faith, pistis, is more akin to allegiance, but it can also mean faithfulness. And that goes against some of our, as Protestants, that can grate against us maybe, but the word needs to be above us, not us above the word. So the DIK word group, dikaiosune, dikaiou, these words that mean justification, justice, again, getting into the, really digging through the ancient usage and seeing how those words were used in context in other situations it's like seeing in color rather than black and white.
red color for the red letter Bible.
He wrote it all.
Yes,
He wrote it all.
Everything should be red letter, right?
That's right. That's right.
Yeah. So you pick up Greek, but you also have, not on your Twitter bio, a bunch of other hobbies. You're a pilot. You're a guitar player.
I am.
You were just telling us about your exploits in that realm, and other things. Can you tell us about what you do outside of the three key things that you listed on your Twitter?
Well, I do. I am a pilot, still licensed. I only since my second child was born, I only do sim time until they're fully out of college and paid for. That's a decision I made with my wife. That and giving up the motorcycle. I just think it just was a question of prudence, because I would go and practice at least once a week flying, which I absolutely love. Did aerobatics, knew a bunch of fighter jocks, and it was absolutely, you can't be thinking about anything else. It's a true escape. And the beauty is unspeakable. But I only do simulator time right now to keep current. But once a pilot, always a pilot. But what really brings me, I have two things that I do that bring me just great joy. I play guitar avidly. I still practice at least an hour a day. I do the occasional session. I had some success in that area in and after college. Played on some records and so on and so forth, and I absolutely love that. It again, when you're doing something like that you're truly in, you can get into a flow state, get into the zone, so to speak, and you're not really thinking about other things, and the fretboard lays itself out for you, and you can create. It's wonderful. And the other thing I do that I love is I coach soccer. I played baseball in college for a little bit, but I always played soccer to stay in shape and loved it. Much to the chagrin of my more traditionally sported family. And when my girls were little, they got invited to, start playing for their little private school and everything. And they asked me to help coach because I'd played college sports. And so I got into coaching and found I absolutely loved it. It's a lot like teaching Sunday school or lecturing, where there's feedback, that interaction where you're able to convey an idea, demonstrate it, convey it, and then that's understood and then performed, and you're able to encourage into that. And that'll get you up in the morning. That interactive reward is, I think it's spiritual. There's a sharing there that's wonderful.
And you've done that in terms of sort of broader mentorship or coaching in different capacities. Sunday school class, obviously soccer coaching. You also do mentorship you've done mentorship for guys trying to break into finance. Is that right?
That's right.
You have an interesting program that you run these guys through.
It's not complicated. It's not complicated to set yourself apart if you have at least a little bit of horsepower, and it's what I focus on is the discipline that's really required to manifestly better yourself. And it's about getting up every morning and getting information in a systematic way so that you're learning about the world. Your professor, what you learn in class, in undergrad, and even in grad school, is mostly how to take this information and put it through some manipulation to get this information. What I focus on is how do you fit that in to the world at large? How does the world work? And I don't mean how it is in a textbook or in theory, but how do things actually happen? So I encourage guys to do a certain kind of reading every day, and then a certain kind of reading on the weekend, and then make notes, and then set aside some time for further study and just be very faithful about that. And usually the kind of guys who come to me are intellectually curious enough that after you do that for about a month, you can't stop. You develop a love for learning about what is going on in the world. How are people around the world interacting with each other? This is in business, but it could be on anything. Similar programs in intel gathering, for instance, and it's really lighting that fire through discipline to learn and better yourself, and it's been great. Every single person I've mentored has done very, very well. And it has nothing to do with me. They're doing it. I mean, I encourage them, say, hey, are you? But again, these are type of guys who all I have to do is light the fire a little bit.
Steer them in the right
That's
direction.
right. Yeah. That's right.
Yeah. For you personally, like you've been in so many different fields and areas, guitar, flying, hedge funds. That curiosity, do you feel like that was something you set up in terms of systems, or did it come naturally to you? How did you end up in this place where you're doing all these different things?
Again, I think the way I came from a broken home, so I didn't have the normal type of I say normal, what's normal anymore? But I didn't have the structure at home where, okay, now we're going to sit down and have a family meal and dad's going to read the paper behind, sequester himself. My wife says I was raised by wolves, basically, but that's unfair. I spent a ton of time with my grandparents. My granddad on my dad's side, he was chief fireman for Bell Helicopter. And he was a bad dude. I mean, he was a godly man, a gentle, loved people, but he put on the foil suit and was on the flight line when they were doing the testing, to send the Cobras and the Hueys off to Vietnam. And he was interested, and he was the same way. He was a beekeeper in his backyard. He raised birds in his garage for pet stores. He had a garden. We had a grapevine with preserves and jams that were grown and sold locally. And I saw him reading his Bible for 2 hours every night. And he just lived out the world is interesting and God is good. So go out and experience it, be part of it, and have an impact on it. He also coached, which had a big impact on me until he was too old to coach, but he coached Little League baseball and for years and years and years. So I always wanted to be like my granddad. I wanted to be around aircraft. I wanted to coach. I wanted to learn my Bible. And I wanted to interact with people at every opportunity. I mean, he just loved people because they're created in God's image. He'd carry around juicy fruit or Wrigley's gum, and we'd walk around when I was a little kid, he and his wife, my grandmother, we'd just go to the mall in Hearst out by Bell Helicopter. And he would just hand out gum and try to start conversations. Everybody was his friend. And that had a huge impact on me.
As you look at the world now, Ron, what kind of themes do you see? I don't know if themes is the word you would even use, but kind of themes do you see playing out, animating the many, many things that are going on, both good and bad? Do you pick out particular themes that you see and track, or do you see or analyze the world in a different way?
Well, each day is different. As far as themes right now, it gets back to where order is profitable and order blesses people. The timelines can be difficult. What concerns me and distresses me a little bit is the fear of order among those that would be most blessed by it. Even folks we may disagree with a bit. But again, it's a Mandelbrot type of order. It's not you're going to be over here and you're going to be over here. But there has to be some order, or life is hard. It's already hard. We're subject to the curse of sin, and be it the boneheaded decisions we make, or disease, or the frailty of human life. Life is fragile. But then adding chaos on top of that, that's bad. So that concerns me. And I see sometimes now what I'm seeing is over my lifetime, what would be considered non-traditional sources of order, and the traditional sources of order kind of turning away. And that's kind of, late stage empire kind of action. But those are long-term trends that when you're in the middle of it are hard to be specific about. It's hard to trade it. That's for sure.
Yeah.
So, but that's kind of, as I'm 56. So as I get a little bit older, those are the things that interest me. And then I try to find how can they apply on a micro level. Macro, it's pretty easy to see, but on a micro level, it's harder.
So when you started earlier in your career, say like 1990, the world of 1990 versus the world of 2023, different worlds across so many factors. But I guess, is that true? Do you think of that as true? And are there, as you've traversed it, are there models that you feel like have paid off across that?
Well, I'll give an anecdote on something that's incredibly. We used to have in America, and I almost hesitate to say this because it's going to sound one way that I don't mean. We had a bit of an American monoculture. And what changed that, as much as anything, you're going to laugh, but Billboard went to SoundScan, and music is a driver of culture. I tell people when I talk about these kind of things, I'm like, go watch an English soccer game and listen to the crowd. Doesn't even matter what's going on the pitch. It's men gathering to sing and have common experience from common. The clubs are very localized. And we used to have that writ large in America. Not that every group participated or saw it in the exact same way, but there was an American culture that was very common, because we had 3 channels on television, but the music especially was driven by what the radio stations were playing. That's how Billboard did their rankings. When they went to SoundScan and went to actually look at what was being bought and sold, you saw the more difficult genres kind of collapse. We had a great, and that broke the America became much more tribal and divided culturally, and I think this SoundScan thing had a huge thing to do with it. Being in music at the time, this was. I think it was in the early 90s, about the time Nirvana, it was before. It was in the late 80s, because it was when rap really became popular. And whether you like it or not, rap is very, very popular. The kids I coach in soccer, that's all they want to listen to. I'm like, hey, a little Shostakovich, maybe. No. So that's Russian. No. So anecdotally, I think you've seen this trend away from this monoculture into a very deeply divided culture. And that's very difficult to impress order upon. And for good reason. What would work for this group over here might not work for this group over there. You see that scripturally. We're given great latitude in how the Bible is applied to different cultural contexts and different geopolitical contexts. So I think sometimes we get a little harsh on people lamenting the lack of cohesive culture in America, but it makes perfect sense. I think we would benefit from having a more cohesive culture, but I don't see it happening as things are currently with the current construct, so to speak. I know that wasn't a direct answer to your question, Josh, but that you were asking that, and that SoundScan anecdote came to mind. I think it was hugely impactful.
Digging into what you just said about Scripture applying or describing different people, applying itself in different ways to different groups. Can you unpack that a little bit more?
Well, look at the First Ecumenical Council. You had statesmanship. You had people get up and talk, and then there was consulting being done, and then a decision that was made. But it was done not in, we think of kind of a managerial consensus way. It was really more vanguard. Look, here's what's going on in the world. Here's what the Bible says. How do we take this and apply it? In the First Ecumenical Council in Acts 15, you see this, we're going to go to the Gentiles, and the moral requirements we're going to focus on are basically a recapitulation of the Noahic covenant. And that you could have, which was really a rejection of the oral tradition, the Mishnah, right? All the stuff that had been added on that Jesus seems to be condemning. What became Talmudic Judaism, right? But it wasn't somebody standing up, although there was vanguardian leadership, there wasn't someone standing up and basically decreeing how it was going to be. So, and in application, the churches were all different. Look at the epistolary literature. The letter to the Corinthians, Paul loves these people, but it's basically a letter on how not to do church, right? And he comes down on them so hard that 2 Corinthians, and there's probably something we're missing in between those two letters, but 2 Corinthians is Paul pouring out his heart saying, don't be discouraged. God's going to get us through this, right? But then you look at at some of the other churches, and they had different structures and different issues and different problems. So there's just an obvious leeway that we're given. I'm a Presbyterian, but I'm very drawn to faithful or kind of Reformed Elizabethan Anglicanism. I just love the order of it. I like when it's done well, and it's not done well often, but when it's done well, there's a rhythm to a Book of Common Prayer liturgy that is beautiful, and you know what's coming, and you pour out your heart in confession, and then you receive absolution, and you immediately go to praise, and so on and so forth. I think that's great, but that's a very royal and very high priestly form of worship that in a less, let's say, on the frontier of faith, where a community is just come to faith, that's going to be lost on them. You need something that's more dirt under your fingernails, or however, a different form. And I think the Bible has, you see that in governments, what different forms of government that can be still faithful. What can't be lost is that Jesus is described as King of Kings, and that's just ancient euphemism for emperor, a king over many different people groups. And we can't back off from that, and we can't back off from this idea of ultimate authority at some level. Somebody, the controversial political philosopher Carl Schmitt said, you've got to have somebody rule the exception. And that sounds very, oh gosh, Carl Schmitt, 1930s Germany, yikes. Well, number one, that was in reaction to Weimar, and Weimar was a disaster. And there are some very key similarities in what they were dealing with to what we're dealing with now. But Schmitt's point was, we understand how we understand government, and good government comes from our understanding of God. And this is obviously true. You just look at the example of Solomon's first act as wise king is an exception, Cutting the baby in half is nowhere in the law. Matter of fact, that on the face of it is against the law. It's sinful. But the exception proved the rule. The judicial miracle, so to speak. So we now live in a system where we've tried to remove, because our materialist understanding of our modern man, our materialist understanding that really wants to shove God in the closet. And okay, that's great if you want to pray. Or as George W. Bush used to say, I believe in the power of prayer. Well, okay, that's great. But because of that materialist understanding, we want to have a materialist format we don't want any exceptions, but you can't get away from it. At some point, you're going to have wisdom. At some point, you're going to have that judicial miracle, that exception, and someone who's wise has to be over that. And we can't completely back away from that. We can try to guard against the abuses that come with that at times.
So what do you think good authority looks like?
Well, I really like the emphasis that Aaron Wrenn and Nate Fisher, friends of mine, and you guys as well, have put on the need for virtuous statesmen. I think that is hard. But what's harder is that maybe we're at a point where one group's idea of what a virtuous statesman is different from another because we disagree on what the basic virtues are. That's hard. That's very hard.
Yeah, and this gets back to the fracture you were talking about earlier.
Yeah, well, I think what Harry Reid was very, you can't say Harry Reid didn't work for his constituents in Nevada, but he basically admitted that there was nothing out of bounds for him to do. That's a problem. I know people hear this and then apply it to. We're at a spot now where it's going to be pretty difficult through electoral processes to get that virtuous statesman. I don't. Maybe there's a way. I hope there's a way. Grassroots, I think being as local as possible. If you're a virtuous guy who can command respect, run for city council, run for dog catcher, just whatever's going to put you around people that's going to have you interact with folks and do what you can to do the little thing. Or maybe today's your last. Did you use today to do something good? And we as Protestants, or me as a Protestant, sometimes shy away from that. That sounds like works religion or moralism, and I really don't mean that at all. But we are called to good works, and we're called to love people. We're not called to just. I've been called an intellectual, but the last thing I want to be known as is somebody who just sits in my office and reads all day. I want to love people and have a positive impact on them. Because guess what? Guess who's going to get better in that as well? Me. I'm going to be convicted to love my wife better, to love the Lord better, to be more devoted, to be a more faithful, father figure to my two girls. So it's a two-way. That's why I'm ultimately, I don't like the term capitalism. That was a Marx term, but I do love I love hand-to-hand price discovery that Smith spoke of. That goes all the way back to as soon as there were, somebody with a goat and somebody with some milk and trading to do, both groups said thank you when that transaction was made. That sounds like Jesus saying you need to love one another, that whole one anothering aspect. That's what that sounds like to me. And so command, while I believe I really do believe we can't shy away from the natural authority that comes with impressing order upon a world. You can't get away from things start to go bad once you get away from that ability for me to go to you, Santi, or you, Josh, and say, hey, I got this, and you've got, let's do some business. Let's do some trading.
If order's not there, you can't do that.
Well, if order's not there, you can't do that. But sometimes we get, the flip side is that order can be so complete and total that we're going to manage that so that you don't have that. I think it was Henry Hazlitt who said the double thank you. That's a problem as well.
Yeah, so that gets an interesting question of sort of a hard imposed totalitarian order in a way versus chaos on the other complete end. So what is in between? We would find the kind of order that yields freedom, right?
Yeah.
I heard you talk once about how this order is built into creation. Can you talk a little bit about how that mechanism works?
Well, we see in Eden, you see what amounts to what's clearly an orchard. It's called a garden, but it's a treed orchard. I would imagine the array probably looked something like the way the tribes were arrayed. I don't know that. That's speculation. But in the middle, you had two trees, all of which were good for food. One was just given what seems to be a temporary prohibition, right? That two tree ordered motif is all through Scripture. You see it again once the tabernacle is built with the Ark of the Covenant. You see the two cherubim that are put on either side of the mercy seat, the top of the Ark of the Covenant. Then you see when we go into a higher state of glory, you see in the temple, you see the large olive wood, interestingly, cherubim that are almost as tall as the entire Holy of Holies and whose wings spread and touch. This order is implied throughout Scripture. I mean, there's a million examples of this. The planets, the wanderers that rule the day and night, and so on and so forth. There's this what the New Testament calls the stoicheia, or the elemental principles that kind of ruled the old covenant. And so there's order there. But I kind of think where you're going is how do we know when the order oversteps its bounds and is coming from what we would say is an ungodly place or an unvirtuous place versus chaos. And I think that dividing line is, what's your view of the corruptibility of man, of what the Bible calls sin? It's a word that's kind of lost all meaning in its use and abuse. But is man corruptible? Is he corrupted? Is man perfectible? Is he perfectible by purely human means? And can utopia, where all imperfection, can that be achieved here on earth without outside help?
Is that the crux of our time?
That's an interesting way to put it. Yeah, I think it is. I think the dividing line in at least in American culture, but in the West, is, does sin exist? And it doesn't. You don't. I mean, I would say that needs to be a Christian understanding, but across cultures, is there a genetic level imperfection that is bound up in the heart of man that cannot be fixed purely from within? And if the answer to that is no, there's not, then you're going to go down the John Paul Sartre, the ultimately there's not going, it's going to be this ugly meaninglessness that is nihilistic, that we're all just bags of meat. And I don't mean to overstate that. There are people who we would disagree with philosophical foundations, who are kind people, who love their kids, who want to do good things. But ultimately, you can't deal with what's obvious chaos and obvious sin or a malady that is bound up in humanity, you can't deal with that and also have a purely materialistic worldview without doing some really, really bad things. I mean, Pol Pot is just a natural outgrowth. Stalin is a natural outgrowth. Hitler ran as a Christian. He wasn't a Christian. He was a pagan. Hitler's pagan response to how do we deal with this Weimar problem, and it just spirals down into a further chaotic, nihilist, murderous mess. Those outcomes shouldn't surprise us. It's what frightens me for the American future, because we are in a we're in a Weimar type of cultural environment here, and there's two ways that gets dealt with. And if it's not dealt with in a way that acknowledges a holy creator, then there's only one way out, and it's through massive, massive bloodshed.
What do you see as that, if you were to look forward, what do you see as that positive outcome given our current state versus negative? What might that look like?
Well, I think there's a real chance that these difficult times could produce incredibly disciplined, virtuous statesmen who can capture the imagination and hearts of not just people that wholly agree with them, but Julia. People talk about you always want to compare things to Rome, and so what did Julius Caesar do when the switch was flipped from republic to imperial state? What he did was he ended proscription, and for not to get too in the weeds, but political enemies, they were killed. Often their families were sold into slavery, and their lands were divvied up among the winners. Politics was a dangerous game. And Caesar basically came along and said it wasn't that he hated the republic. He just said, there's only one way out of this, is I am the leader of all people. We're not going to do proscription anymore. So I would hope that whatever the end game outcome is, that we have someone who can still preserve that double thank you of people being able to trade, to do business together, but also who would end what is surely becoming a prescriptionary environment in America. Cancel culture is just a tiny piece of that. No, lives want to be ended, and I'm certainly a rightist, but I want a leader who will inspire people who don't agree with me on that, who can encourage all folks to say, can we stop this madness, and can we not love has turned into a meaningless term too. Love has almost completely been engulfed by the Greek word eros, where it's just, how can I be served by this dopamine hit, right? We just want physical and visual pleasure. No, I'm talking that agape, where love has demands. Love has demands on the person who feels it and demands on the object. Good demands. No, I'm going to take you and make you better. That's what I hope for. I'm no prophet, but that's what I hope for. I always think there's hope, as long as there are churches who bow the knee, as long as there are churches who believe in the work of the Holy Spirit that is real, as long as there are faithful people who are willing to go and engage the culture, not submit to the culture, not be syncretistic with the culture, but engage it, not just be in holy huddles, but go out and engage with people. There's always hope. I fear the judgment that we may be under isn't complete and total.
I mean, if Scripture is the model that we're following, which it is, there's certainly more that can come.
Absolutely.
Ron, we bounce back and forth between like politics and Bible and trading and business. I think this is kind of indicative of all of our conversations with you in general. But one of the things, kind of connecting those dots again, is people. You want people to live under the reality of the world, how the world is made, specifically Christians. And one of the things that you make a big deal of, out of, I think because the Bible does so, is that, as you mentioned earlier, Christ is King of Kings. He's the Emperor. He is ruling. He has authority. There seems to be a divorce now from that idea, not just even a divorce. And churches and Christians deliberately, they're not knowing that that's a reality, that Christ is King, or just not knowing, not caring, living their lives sort of, in dissonant ways with that truth that's central to the politics of Scripture. Can you talk a little bit about how you see that working out?
It's a word that comes to mind that is way overused. I wish I had a different word, but I see the Gnostic instinct in the American church alive and well. Sadly, Gnosticism was a philosophy that was present in the first century, but really came full bloom in the third and fourth century. It's from the Greek word gnosis, that you're saved by knowledge and hidden knowledge, and that that the material is bad and the spiritual or the unseen is very good. It comes from a poor interpretation of Plato's cave scene that in the Republic. How I see that manifest in the churches is we're always looking for the secret, not the secret thing that God has hidden, but the secret thing that's going to provide some level of heaven here on earth. And how it also tends to manifest is that, look, if I do X, it's only in the body. What's spiritual is what really matters. It's what my inner heart means. Well, the Bible's pretty clear that my inner heart is deceitful and wicked. And those are harsh terms to our modern ears, but that's what it says, right? That
the opposite of follow your heart.
The opposite of follow your heart. You need to follow a leader who lays that plumb line, right? That snaps that chalk line, and I know that's what the target is. And I know every time I shoot an arrow, I'm not going to hit that plumb line because I'm a sinner. My aim is armatia sin, just as a old archery term. It means missing the bullseye. So my arrows aren't perfectly straight; they got a little curve to them, and so they're gonna miss. But I got to know what that line is, what that target, what Paul says, the mark, the high call of God. So I think I heard a comment the other day that I said, in a visit with a guy, I said, Jesus is king. And he said, yeah, but he's a spiritual king. And the point that he was making was that it was a very immaterial argument that I don't even know what it means ultimately. Spiritual in the Bible just means having to do with the Spirit of God, the creative person of God who is shown as the matchmaker, as the one who gives life and breath, as the one who inhabits, that person of God who inhabits the place when two or more are gathered in his name. Spiritual doesn't mean not real somehow. And that to me, I see that in the churches very big, that Jesus is king, but he's a spiritual king, which really, it scares me that what that means is that's code for he's not really king at all. That, show me being a hard pass on that idea.
Do you see similarities between that kind of thinking and I'm a man trapped in a woman's body? I mean, they have the same root.
Yeah, matter. We are not materialists as Christians. We believe there is a spiritual world that we cannot see, that the prophets had special access into. But we believe matter matters. We're not Gnostics, and you did not choose your name. You did not choose your hair color, your eye color, your height, what family you were born into. As Paul says in Acts 17, the boundaries of our habitation, those were all given to you. And you may find injustice with that, but it's reality. You're in good company with every other human who's ever been born. And part of that mark, the most indelible part of that mark that he placed on your in your genome, there's obviously these very difficult cases where folks' genetic materialism is, but these are tiny minority cases. We have wisdom and the exception for wise people to deal with those exceptions. But for most of us, every drop of blood, every cell of skin, every marks how we were born and what we are given to, and we need to get real. Who was it? The TV guy who always said, get real. Well, that part is right. We have to get real with that and be okay. The things that you can do to make yourself better, eat, if you're, go lift or eat right and go run or exercise, but you can't change certain basic things.
No seed oils. Avoid seed oils.
Yeah, you know way more about that than I do. I'm 56. All that came after. I guess I'm supposed to avoid microplastics too.
Yes, yes, everything. Do not touch receipts. They make you.
Okay.
They turn you into a woman. That's what right-wing Twitter told me.
Well, but reality is reality, and that's very, very difficult in a world. It's very difficult for somebody. Think about somebody who's grown up now. They can get on an airplane. I mean, if they're in the West and they have some means, they can get on an airplane and go wherever. And really, most Western countries not going to. I mean, they say, hey, you need a green card. I mean, money's pretty fungible nowadays. You can kind of go and be wherever. You can live wherever. You can dye your hair. You can. It's acceptable now, even for women, to shave all their hair off. I mean, you can kind of create and craft this reality. You get on your computer and get on Street View, and you can be anywhere virtually in 30 seconds. So I understand the pull of, it's interesting traditionally, the transsexual movement was white, powerful, intelligent males were the largest piece of that, because that was the last thing they didn't have control over. So obviously this is a manifestation of trying to control our reality, and it's viral. I mean, look at the growth of it. The growth of this movement is following a pathogen type of reality, right? So, I mean, I don't know. I'm not trying to be offensive here, but it seems clear what's going on. This is a sociological pathogen that's infected us. I don't mean that to be insensitive to some folks who have real psychological or health issues in these minor cases, but in the most part, this is people just grasping to control a part of reality, the one part of reality the one part of reality that they do not have control over.
Yeah, it seems like in the mind of the post-liberal individual, you think, going back to a point you made earlier, there's a sense of trying to solve, first man doesn't have sin, there's no chaos. And if there is, we can solve it from within. We can solve it ourselves.
Oh, that's great.
And I think I've heard you talk about this, where there's this delusion that we've now reached a point in time in the West where we've we've banished sin, we've banished oppression, we've banished even nuclear war. I mean, with the whole Ukraine-Russia stuff that's going on, there's a sense of like, that can't possibly happen here anymore. We are the apex of human civilization, and all these bad things that happened 50 years ago, whatever, can't possibly hurt us anymore.
I imagine that is the perception. I read too much. I see too much intel to know I know the world is still a very, very. It's a very chaotic place, and the pillows we've placed on the walls of our reality can burn pretty easily. They're not made with Nomex. They are we are 3 days away from having no access to food. I'm not trying to be alarmist, and I'm no prepper, but we're 3 days away. This whole civilizational thing is based upon a lot of mutual handholding, and we take a lot of order imposition for granted that could go away very quickly. You would not want to be. I am not in the majority opinion on this Ukraine-Russian conflict, but you would not want to be on the river in Ukraine right now, staring down hypersonic missiles and Putin trying to widen the neutral land on his what he sees as a NATO threat. You wouldn't want to be there. Life looks pretty different, and we could, America's given so many advantages. We have 2 oceans. We have a post-colonial state and a post-colonial state that we deal with such kid gloves. If we're this empire, on the one hand we act like an empire, and on the other hand we act like a very poorly run borough in New York, and with all the cognitive dissonance that goes with that. If we were a true empire, we would have a friendly state to the north, and we'd have a puppet state to the south, and we'd have a colony sitting right on the edge of the Gulf of Mexico. We have none of those things, and I don't say that as some type of imperialist. It's just if you're gonna do the empire thing, the only way to do that and not subject your people to incredibly wild economic and disastrous job robbing schemes, which we've seen over the last 20, 25 years, is you gotta take care of some things that are uncomfortable. That's all I want to say about that.
That's the on a future episode we'll get.
Well, you subject your people if you're going to do the imperial thing, and you're not willing to do those other things, which I'm not advocating. You're just subjecting your people to chaos at home, and that's sinful to me.
Yeah. I heard somebody talk about Afghanistan as I thought it was a helpful framework as a failed colony of the empire. If you think about the British Empire as a Commonwealth has all these colonies, and they can hold them, they can use them, they can build them. Ours was total failure in that imperial sense of plays we try to establish. And to your point, you end up ruining, destroying lives of locals and of foreigners of Americans in this case that we send over to the place.
Sent a ton of young boys over there to be maimed and killed. We killed a lot of Afghanis who were made according to the religion that the world sees us, the God that they think we worship, created in His image, whether they agree with that or not. And because we wanted to play, it really kills me. Successful empires give great leeway to their colonies to it should be a blessing. And in many cases it was, the anti-colonialism it rules the day right now, but you bring stability, you bring language, common language, which is usually not the case in these colonies. You bring, and this isn't the answer to everything, but you do bring the opportunity for increased wealth and so on and so forth. And we were unwilling to do those things, but it was exactly it was a recapitulation of what we did. The Charlie Wilson episode from the Reagan years. We promised those poor people so much. I actually had a friend who later came over here, who was a mujahideen, and just a great guy who spoke about how they were so excited about all the promises we made about roads and hospitals and schools that would be done in their tradition. They would be able to keep their way of life. And as soon as the Russians backed out, it just dried up. We created this both Wahhabi and Talibanic impulse because we didn't keep our word. And it was so easy. It's pennies on the dollar compared to what we spent on that war. Pennies on the dollar. Very, very unfortunate. But I hope that there are folks who are seeing this. Hopefully there's some kid who's been probably either homeschooled or raised with real history, who sees these things, who will one day rise up and be this virtuous statesman who can say the hard truths that we're not always the perfect. America is not always the perfect deal, but we can be. We can be better, at least, in how we deal with our neighbors and foreign. There needed to be don't get me wrong. There needed to be a response to 9/11. That was heinous evil, and we needed to. The first 6 months of that, of what W led us in. Yeah, I thought he brought the country together. He was that statesman. And I didn't care for all his language about you're either for us or against us. Some of that was, I think, unwise. But in the broad strokes and sending a very small force over there to really try to root out evil, I thought that was wonderful. Where it turned into this institutional platform to go hem in Iran, I thought was kind of silly. Sorry. I know that's far afield, and we're getting a little bit into global intel. But
so in the case of the one contrary case to those type of examples I can think of is like Japan post-World War II, which did very well.
Yeah.
Do you think there are lessons there to learn? It can be applied elsewhere. Or is that just specific to the Japanese people, you think?
I think the lessons to learn from Japan, Japan is a monolithic culture, very traditional, although some of these traditions are breaking down over the last 15 years. There's some weirdness going on in Japan right now. I wonder what the folks who are 60 and over in Japan are thinking with the, folks dressing up as animals and all that. I mean, there's some weird stuff going on. But Japan has all the benefits of how, if you'd asked me 20 years ago, I would have said they would have collapsed. Their demographics are terrible. Their national debt is theoretically crushing. They have until recently, really no ability to defend themselves. But what they had was a traditionalist culture that respected elders, was very orderly. So they had at certain times, presidents who would come in and make sure the boat wasn't completely being rowed towards the waterfall. There was a reason the former prime minister was assassinated. He was a voice for, not a Christian voice. I would love to see a revival there. I mean, not a revival, but Christianity take that nation. I just don't want it to be American Christianity as currently constituted. I have a friend who's a missionary in Japan. Been there for 20 years. And he loves the Japanese people. I still want to go, But anyway, the fact that they were able to come back from what we did, and firebombing their big cities and then dropping 2 nukes and then they respond with almost a reverential awe for old American culture. You still go over there, and that's where all our selvage denim factories are. The guys wear it's considered really hip and cool to wear the old World War II, A2 and G1 leather jackets, fighter pilot jackets. They saw Americans as their conquerors in a sense, and therefore to be emulated. And there's something very ancient about that. I don't know how to completely break it down, but
yeah, I saw a great meme on that. It says, I want to be the American that the Japanese think we are. And it has those images.
God, that's a great line. I love that. I do too.
Yeah.
I do too.
Yeah. So the situation in Ukraine, you had given a talk on that, and I unfortunately missed most of it, but that's a situation where if I had been stuck in a coma and I had woken up, several years later, and there's Ukrainian flags all over the U.S. People are hanging them out of their windows.
Mm-hmm.
What is happening there? How did we get to that point in that situation?
Well, we don't have enough. We don't have enough time to really go into detail. But in 2012, the Ukrainians had an election and basically wanted to pivot eastward. They did most of their trade. They wanted a free trade agreement with Russia. It was mutually beneficial, and they pivoted. Not the whole country monolithically, but the majority wanted to make that pivot and voted for that candidate in that slate of candidates in 2012. That, it seems, without going into too much detail, was not acceptable to the State Department, especially the true operatives, Newland specifically, but the whole state apparatus and the intel apparatus seems, and with certain anecdotal stories after that came out, seems that there were things going on that in Ukraine that we wanted to continue going on. And it makes sense. We freaked out under George W. Bush's presidency at a move in Georgia when Saakashvili, who was, basically an American, he was educated here, Harvard, I believe Harvard educated. Don't that detail might be off, but was placed into power in Georgia as kind of a soft American citadel against Russia. And we reacted that way there. It shouldn't have surprised us that we reacted the way. So in 2012, you had this pivot eastward by the Ukrainians, and then you had this strange, after this landslide proportion election, you had this uprising in 2014 that if you look at the leaked cell phone recordings from Newland and who was the Undersecretary of State under Obama, seems that we helped encourage this color revolution. Because something was going on in Ukraine that we, I don't think it's as simple as, I would love to say, hey, we need more NATO because the military-industrial complex needs more customers. There's probably some truth to that, but I think that there was probably, we wanted a friendly base of operations for intel gathering. I think we were doing some things in the energy space and in the research space that we can do in non-NATO aligned but non-Russian aligned countries that you can't do in other places. I don't want to go into any more details because but anyway, we had certain reasons that we didn't want that to go. So it seems as though we engineer a color revolution. And in 2014, the country really pivots in a bloody way back to a pro-EU, pro-American stance with some weird details. I can't say his name. Saakashvili, the former president of Georgia, who was educated at Harvard, now who speaks Georgian and English, not Ukrainian, becomes the head of one of the districts in Ukraine. That's weird. So there's a strange pivot that you have this Maidan color revolution that seems to be we seem to be highly involved in. And Russia responds almost immediately by retaking Crimea. All the people were Russian in Crimea. They had voted. That was the largest block of univocal block in the 2012 election. And there was not I think 6 people might have died, and 3 of those might have been accidental deaths in the taking. The Russians traditionally, and this is a long answer to a simple question, and I'm sorry, but I don't know any way to how to go about this other than really give some background, because the Ukrainian-Russian thing has a lot of geopolitical teeth to it. The Russians have nothing, none of the natural benefits that we do. You know, we have 2 oceans and 2 non-threats, right? The Russia has none of that. It's a vast plain. You can drive an army straight to Moscow. There's the Fulda Gap in the north through Germany and then Poland, and then there's the through Ukraine, which literally is in Russian. I'll probably screw this up, but it means frontier. But at the edge of Ukraine, then you have some mountainous area that forms a natural barrier. The Russians, therefore, throughout their history, have been a very paranoid people about invasions that they've been subject to throughout their history. So it makes sense. Any empire, and Russia, even though you can call it whatever it is, it's not a monolithic state. There's between 14 and 17 distinct ethnic groups within Russia. And with any type of ethnic empire, and by ethnic, I mean multi-ethnic, you have to have buffer states to make it work. It's why I said we need to have it. We've definitely become a multi-ethnic, multicultural empire. Canada and Mexico and Cuba need to be friends. Otherwise, it just breaks down. You see what happens right now. We can't control our southern border. Whether you believe we need some type of immigration or not, and there's arguments on both sides of that. Where it is now, I think, is insane, but there's arguments, okay? But you do need friends and you do need buffers. Otherwise, you have way too much chaos on your own borders. And Russia's dealt with this. They've basically got 7 gaps that they try to manage, and there's not enough people to do it. And they have to keep these gaps away or push back from their narrow strip that they can grow their food. And part of that strip runs right through Ukraine. Ukraine was a separate district from the beginning, simply because as a favor that I guess it was Stalin did. So anyway, I'm not making excuses for Putin. Putin's a thug. Putin was the thug that kept the gangs and the gangsters in line in St. Petersburg in St. Petersburg, which is the biggest port for commerce during the USSR times and now, and that anytime you have a large port, you're going to have gangsters, you're going to have foreign currencies, you're going to have prostitution, all these things. Putin managed that. That's how he rose to power. Yeltsin, we can go far into this, but everything that's happened in Russia makes sense. Them trying to push against the borders in Ukraine makes sense. If you're asking me what should be done, I think you should have the breakaway states that voted to stay with Russia and be breakaway, give those, set the line there and make Ukraine completely neutral and have them administered by Poland, Romania, and Hungary. Have similar to what was done to Germany. but have it be completely neutral. This will never happen because we want that territory. We ultimately want that to be a NATO area for several reasons. I think the economic reasons are clear. We want there to be more customers, not just for the military industrial complex, but we also want there to be more customers for healthcare and da 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 da. I think there's probably a fair amount of political money laundering that goes on there. I don't think that's as big an issue as the conspiracy theorists would say, but it is absolutely an issue. And then the main thing that the reason it's not going to happen, that you're going to have a sane bilateral agreement for a neutral Ukraine, is that the folks who are pushing the expansion of the neoliberal West are on a religious crusade. And it's this crusade about Russia is definitely on the other side of the line about, is there sin? Is there a need for a church, for spirituality, for Putin he is absolutely a Russian nationalist, but he is an Orthodox Russian nationalist. He wants the head of Orthodoxy. He wants the seat of Orthodoxy to be in Moscow. His mother was a deeply, deeply devout Orthodox believer. His father was a communist. You took what you could get in Soviet Russia, but this informs Putin's mind. He speaks to me as a reader of Dostoevsky in the way he forms his arguments, the way he seems as though he has a deep understanding of the underground man, and we won't get deeply into that. But that's, to me, how I make sense of what's going on in Ukraine. I think there's an absolute right thing to do that would be amenable to all sides, but it wouldn't be amenable to the neoliberals who are in the State Department. They are on a religious crusade. They're doing what they think is right. So that's the barrier I see. And it won't, let's say that there's a different president after 24. There's no chance of this happening unless you have a massive change of scenery for going down many, many levels in the civil service in the State Department. That's my opinion.
Can it escalate to nuclear war?
Sure it can. I think it's by God's grace we didn't see something crazy happen after the Bay of Pigs. Khrushchev was a nut. How that there wasn't at some point a preemptive strike. I'm honestly in the reading that I do, I'm surprised that Truman wasn't tempted at points. Anyway, that's not to cast aspersions on anyone. It seems as though there's a hand of protection upon God's world. I would not lean upon God's grace unjustly, though. But sure, it could. I am less worried about China than most on the right. I'm worried about it just being a strictly atheist state, and therefore the ugliness that can happen with that, more so than, they could cause real problems if they got weird and scared. They could close off Malacca Strait, and that's 30% of world commerce goes right there off the coast of Singapore. That's an issue. I'm sanguine about Putin launching a large-scale attack. Could we see a tactical nuke and then that give us reason to go and do something stupid? Yeah, that's the scenario that scares me. It wigged me out a little bit when I saw the depleted uranium ammo dump get hit by the missile a couple of weeks back, and I saw that, and I'm immediately going to some off-the-book sources that I have on what they were seeing, because you did see some fissile material in the plume, but it was depleted. So that calmed me a little bit. But yeah, man, the equivalent of a B-61, that could spark something pretty ugly.
Yeah, I mean, I guess in terms of your analysis, Russia is not part of the gay, is what how you could put it.
No.
And we cannot abide that.
We cannot abide that. We want that to be a full. We are incredibly Trotskyite in our applied politics. Does that make sense?
The gay, by the way, June. This is June when this episode will be released, but it refers to not GAY but GAE.
Yeah, the global American
Empire, right?
Neoliberal, the religious neoliberal ideal of complete and utter emancipation from any unchosen bonds.
Yeah, and total equality, as Charles Haywood would. Yeah,
total equality, absolutely. Haywood's a very clear thinker on this.
Yeah. Ron, we're getting to the end of our time, but 2 questions we ask all of our guests. They sort of play off each other. The black pill and white pill question. Black pill, what's worse than people realize?
I think as James Poulos so writes so well about, and if you don't know who James Poulos is, look him up.
We'll put his Twitter in the show notes.
Please do. Yeah. Brilliant guy, great guy, lover of people, lover of those made in God's image. But I don't think we have any idea the level of devastation that social media is wreaking upon our young people right now, and on young men with unfettered access to porn. And I think it shocks me. I mean, teach your kids some self-discipline by the time they're 5. I think you're pretty much done after that. And have a plan on how you introduce them. You can't keep them from technology. I mean, it'd be like keeping them from cars and making them ride horses, But my black pill is what that is doing to our not just our young people. That's just the one that has the folks it has the biggest impact on.
What about the white pill? What's better than most people realize?
People are still made in the image of God, and everyone is worthy of hearing their story and talking to them. We have enemies as Christians. We have enemies. Jesus didn't say, I've come, now you have no enemies. He said, love your enemies. And he used the Greek word for a personal enemy. We as Christians, we have group enemies. We have enemies that are clearly aligned against our view of the world and against Jesus' reign. But individuals, we're to love. And you can, Jesus had a real beef against what Pharisaism is. He probably politically a Pharisee himself, but hated what Pharisaism had become in its adding to God's law and so on and so forth. Yet he loved individual Pharisees. He hated prostitution. It was against his clear revealed will of sanctity of intercourse. Yet he loved individual prostitutes. That's the ethic we need to be following, and it's available. There is fellowship at every turn. It's just waiting for you to take the initiative. We have destroyed male friendship signaling through the complete and utter takeover of our civic discourse by the homosexual movement. And so it's very difficult for men to engage other men in friendly conversation. Get over it, get past it, and engage people. And my white pill is that's available all over in churches, in civic organizations, your neighbors, the ones Jesus said to love. It's right around the corner, and you will make a difference. This sounds like like some kind of motivational speech. I don't mean it that way, but it's right there. It's right there.
Awesome. Ron, thank you so much for coming on the pod.
Thanks for having me. It was a real pleasure.
Yeah, awesome. Thank you.
You bet.